Hello! It's me, Junebug, again with another true crime time. And for the first time filming one of these in months, it's sunny and I don't know what to do with it. I thought it'd help the lighting in here, but it's making it worse. It's making me look worse. So ignore that I look like crap. And my hands are turning colors, but it's still cold, but it's sunny. And I am recovering from a cold, so I might be a bit nasally, have some sniffles. Might have to stop and go blow my nose during this video. So we have Bip and Philip. They don't know what to do with the sun either. This looks really dark, but then when I turn off the ring light, it's a whole mess. Anyway, we're gonna jump right in. And I mentioned in my last true crime about Bonnie Leigh Scott that this next one it's going to be a bit different than normal. It's still a true crime, but there is no murder. And isn't it great when people don't murder other people? We're going to talk about a case that does not involve murder today. But do you remember, if anyone has watched all my true crimes, minus my grandmother, thank you, Bobby Greenlease. He had the highest ransom payments like ever at the time he was kidnapped and then murdered, until this case that I'm about to cover. So we're going to talk about the ransom of /for Virginia Piper, and this takes place July 27th of 1972. So Bobby Greenlease held that record for over 20 years, I think, and Virginia at the time is about 49/50 years old. This takes place in Orano, Minnesota, and the status is solved with a question mark, and you'll see when we get into it. Oh, and as always, not as always, this is the second video with the new phone. I can't put the microphone in because there's no more jacks in these phones, so I'll try to be loud, or if I'm too loud, I'm sorry, just roll with it. We're going to start with Virginia, or Ginny, Lewis Piper was born November 24th of 1922 in Hennepin County, Minnesota, to Addison Lewis and Dorothy Dutoit Lewis. And she had two known sisters that I could find, and they were both younger, named Charlotte and Patricia. Charlotte, Patricia, and Virginia. Those are very nice names. And I like with most of these older cases, granted this took place in the 70s, which is, holy crap, almost 50 years ago. I was not born in the 70s, if you can't tell, but I still don't imagine it being like 50 years ago. Anyway, but I didn't see much on her upbringing. I assume it wasn't terrible. I could be wrong. Didn't see anything. But she would later marry Harry Cushing Bobby Piper Jr. He goes by Bobby for some reason, but I might just call him Harry because we've dealt with Bobby Frank and Bobby Greenlease, and then Bobby Greenlease has already been mentioned in this. I might just call him Harry. I'm sorry. But she married Harry Piper Jr. He was born on October 14th, 1917 in the same county. And I saw he was drafted in 1940. And they were wed in 1942. So I don't know if it was during his service or if he never actually had to go. I don't quite know. I just know he was drafted in 1940-ish. And they led a pretty well-off life. She was a socialite for a living, which I'm still not quite sure what that means they do. But she was a socialite because Harry, her husband, was the CEO and chairman of the Minneapolis investment firm Piper Jaffray, it has two A's, and Hopwood Inc., which is now called Piper Sandler Companies, if you know that company. I did not. So they got some money, and they would have 3 sons together. There's Harry III, Addison, and David. And then I didn't see much about their life up until July 27th of 1972. So that afternoon, Virginia was outside gardening when 2 housekeepers alerted her about 2 masked men with guns coming into the house. I'm not quite sure how that all went down. I don't know if they like saw them running to the house and then ran to her like, I don't know for certain. But the housekeepers were then tied up. Virginia was handcuffed, and the men asked where her quote unquote old man was, her husband. And he was at the office at this time, which she told them that. And then they took Virginia. They covered her head with one of her pillowcases, Habud, and put her in the back seat of a green coupe. Again, not a car lady. I'm gonna just throw up some images of what that could be. Now they typed a ransom note wanting $1 million. That's a lot today. In 1972, when this happened, that's worth about $5.5 million today. And that's the largest ransom ever seen at the time, which, again, higher than Bobby Greenlease, who was the record holder, which I think was like $500,000 or something until this point. And since then, the record has been broken, as a side note, which I might cover one of those cases. So within the next 2 days, her husband Harry, or Bobby, came up with the cash because he's loaded and he wants his wife. So he stuffed 50,000 $20 bills into a duffel bag. It said it weighed about 110 pounds when he was done. And he, very brave man, he drove alone without surveillance for 2 hours to leave the money in the trunk of a car behind Sportsman Retreat Bar, which was north of downtown Minneapolis. So get you a man or lady who's as loyal as Mr. Harry. Now, after they had the ransom, because Harry dropped it off in the car trunk and skedaddled, the kidnappers called an unconnected person from the case to give the location of Virginia. And I later saw they called a pastor. I don't know why they called a pastor. Maybe because his number was more accessible. Just beep beep boop church. I don't know. But they called a pastor to let him know where Virginia was. He was not involved in any way, minus this. So about 1 p.m. Saturday, July 29th, just 2 days later, 5 FBI agents found Virginia chained to a tree near Jay Cook State Park, which is about 2.5 hours or 150 plus miles from her home. And she was still alive. Which, let's take a moment, that's very exciting. That she was still alive. Traumatized, chained to a tree, but she's still alive. And they found her. So obviously they brought her back home and all that stuff, but the big question is, who did it? And we don't really know to this day. So that's why it said it's solved. Because yes, Virginia's home, she's safe. They found her, but we don't really know who did it, or, well, why is probably for the money, but we don't really know who. It was believed, authorities spoke to about 1,000 possible suspects, which is a lot, but only 2 really stood out to them. And that first person was Donald Larson, who was a 45-year-old truck driver who has had trouble with the law before, and since childhood he's just kind of been a troublemaker. And the other person was Kenneth Callahan, who was another man who had trouble with the law, and they had Donald and Kenneth had overlapping jail times. So it's possible that, prison times. Overlapping prison times in the 40s. So they thought they could possibly have done this. Now, the reason why they stood out was, 1, their criminal records. Not saying that people can't change, but in many cases, it's shown that people who've had trouble with the law 100% don't just become a saint, angel person. So there was that. They quote unquote knew each other. I couldn't see for certain if they were like buddies or if they like bonded in prison, or if they were just like acquaintances from prison. I couldn't really see, but they knew each other. And they matched the descriptions from Virginia and the housekeepers. And that's all I could find. That's all I could find for why they thought these men were the prime suspects. But unfortunately, some key evidence was destroyed that would have helped confirm this. There was a piece of hair. I don't know what happened to the hair, if it just blew away in the breeze, but there was a piece of hair that they lost that could have maybe connected them to the crime. Then I believe something else was destroyed. I forgot what it was, but I know a piece of hair was, it just lost. A sole piece of hair. So they did go to trial. I believe they were found guilty, but then they were, I think, acquitted is the term. I'm not good with technical law terms, in case you haven't noticed. But they, like, basically the court, jury, the people who decide this changed their minds and they were, like, let go. They agreed they actually didn't do this. And I'll link, it's like a 3-part article I used for some of my research of the evidence was very minimal. One could go very much either way, especially with this key evidence being destroyed or just lost in the case of the single hair. So I can link that in the description box to see what you guys think. But they were found guilty, but then later not found guilty. But with the ransom money, remember, it was $1 million he paid. Only about $4,000 of that was ever found to this day. Only $4,000! And they were found in banks in Owatonna, Rochester, Austin, Casson, and Dodge Center. I assume these are all in Minnesota, but I don't know for sure. That means $996,000 is still on the loose somewhere, or unaccounted for. I don't know, buried in a hole. Almost $1 million, all that money's missing still. That's crazy. But for the aftermath of this case, Virginia would end up, unfortunately, with PTSD, and I cannot blame her for that. And she would later pass away in 1988 from pancreatic cancer when she was 65. So no murder, but there's still death because death is unfortunately a part of life. And then her husband Harry would pass in 1990 at the age of about 73. I did not see what from. And I believe all 3 of their sons are still alive. I could be wrong, but I believe they are all still alive. As for the 2 men they thought could possibly have done this, but also not have done this, it's confusing. But Kenneth Callahan, he would just live out the rest of his life in Wisconsin. He just was released. He's like, well, time to go home. So he went home and lived out the rest of his life. Didn't really see much on what he did for the rest of his life. I think he's passed. Yes, they have both passed at this point. Now, Donald Larson, he would go back to serving his life sentence because they took him out of his life sentence of prison to go to trial for this kidnapping they thought he could have done. But after he was found not guilty of this the second time, he went back to serving his life sentence for killing his wife, her lover, and their 3 children. So he just sucks. He sucks. So luckily, even if he did do it, he was in prison for the rest of his life. He ended up passing away in prison. I debated on doing a true crime on that because that just randomly appeared in the articles I was reading for research for this. I was like, what? He did what? He killed 5 people? I don't like Donald Larson. You suck. And that's it. Pretty cut and dry case. I just found it interesting. I was like, well, what was the highest ransom? Like, what beat Bobby's record? And this was the case that broke that record. And I might do another case someday about an even higher ransom. Because it sort of fascinates me. I don't know why. Because I've said before, in other ransoms like gone bad, like Marion Parker, that they're so stupid to think, I need money, let's kidnap someone and get a ransom. It's still a horrible thing. But then there's cases like these where they got away with it. They literally got away with like $996,000 that we have not seen since. I think that also because she was still alive, it fascinated me a little bit because I'm like, oh, that's nice. They didn't kill her. I don't know if they would have killed her. I don't really know. I obviously do not know. Duh. But that is it for today. I will link the article, like the big 3-part article I used for part of my research. Then there's also a book about this I can link down below as well in the description box. Well, I hope you like this slight change of pace and a shorter video. I hope a shorter video. And hope y'all have a good day. Bye, y'all.